So thanks all of you for coming to this session at Discover, the state of data protection and the future of Zerto. My name is Chris Schin. I'm the general manager of the Data Protection Solutions Suite at HPE. Obligatory, this all could change statement. The way we're framing it up today is there are two trends I want to discuss. And they're going to be in the context of Zerto and how Zerto can assist with these trends. But there are actually two very different topics, right? One of them is the acquisition of VMware and the changes in the licensing models that have ensued and how our customers are reporting back to us what they're doing to try to adapt to those changes. And then the second one is we're going to focus a little bit more on how cyber threats have definitely superseded natural disaster type threats in the world of data protection. People who are looking to recover can no longer, the stakes have gone up and the requirements have gone up as well. So the first of these I'm going to start with is VMware. So for the better part of 2.5 decades, we in this industry have had the luxury of living in a world where there was an understanding that VMware was ubiquitous. We effectively had a monopoly in our industry. There were certainly other pockets of hypervisor technologies that existed in the world, but it was a near certainty that VMware was going to be there. And so the rest of the technology industry has sort of grown up to fill in around VMware. But the expectation is always VMware's there, right? Whether you're doing a monitoring solution, you need to be able to monitor VMware. If you're doing a data protection solution, you're going to do it for VMware. You'll notice on this slide, I'm not focusing on public cloud. I'm not focusing on containers. I'm just, for simplification's sake, we're just looking at on-prem hypervisors in the world that we are now, in our opinion, leaving, right? And so here's a artist rendition, so to speak, of what the world of tomorrow might look like, right? And we've picked some logical players here in the on-prem hypervisor market. But this is legitimately what we're seeing, right? I've talked to partners who have said, a year ago, 98% of our VMs were on VMware. As of today, a year later, it's down to 75%. There's just there's a change happening in the industry, and everybody's going to have to adapt to it. To highlight this, given that Zerto is a data protection solution, I sort of zeroed in on one particular slide to highlight the point. And that is that previous to the recent licensing changes, we had VMware offered a set of data protection solutions. SRM was the most common, Site Recovery Manager, ransomware recovery, cloud disaster recovery, et cetera. Now those have been bundled with new names and then ultimately with new packaging. So what we're seeing is, and this is not just in the data protection realm, but I chose that to highlight, we're seeing an increasing bundling of technologies that used to be available a la carte that now must be purchased together in a collective. And that stat down there, 20% of enterprise VMware customers will begin to leave in 2024, is not me or HPE sort of throwing stones at VMware. They have publicly stated this as well. This happens to be a Forrester comment here. But that's sort of the world we're living in, is this, what once was a monopoly is now slowly becoming a bit of a diaspora. And as I said on the last slide, it's not, I only depicted hypervisors there. It's a perfectly logical answer to this dynamic to say I'm going to move more of my workloads to AWS or Azure or what have you. But I was just trying to, or even just jump over and try to go straight into a container-based world. But what I was trying to do there is just say, even in this on-prem hypervisor space, things are getting a lot more complicated in the way we have to adapt. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on this slide because I haven't even described for you yet what Zerto is and what it does, right? And I'll do this at a couple different levels. And I promise I won't single out one side versus the other, but I'm going to start my pointer on this side. So in the initial instantiation, never mind, can't even see it. In the initial instantiation of Zerto back in the day, these on-premise blocks here, the blue ones that you see on both sides, representing on-premise, that was VMware to VMware. That was where the product started. Zerto could create a disaster recovery copy, either co-located or remote, using the ability to intercept IOs at the VMware kernel, transfer them over to the secondary copy, and commit them to a secondary copy, right? So this is a very low RTO, RPO solution. We're literally taking IO by IO, sending it to a second copy, committing it, so that if you need to fail over, you've got all your VMs in a consistent state in the secondary site, okay? The first thing that started to happen as we followed our customer requests is people who didn't have a second data center were requesting, can I have my second data center be in the public cloud? So that brings us those clouds at the top, right? We also have the ability not only to replicate on premises, but also if you want, you can replicate and have your secondary copy be at AWS or at Azure today. Those are the two that are supported by Zerto today. And then the next thing we were asked is, well, hey, can I have my primary be in AWS and my DR copy be in Azure, right? So we created that dynamic where you can go back and forth between the clouds. And then the last thing that happened was we started to get requests back on premise for Hyper-V. So and then the one thing I want to make sure I point out is that a lot of our customers don't even provide their own DR site. They work with their partners, their managed service provider partners, and Zerto has a huge landscape of managed service provider partners who will supply anything from managing your primary to providing a secondary to managing the replication, whatever the needs are of the individual customer, right? So what's not completely jumping off this slide that is becoming a more important dynamic as we look to people who have incentive to maybe move from one hypervisor to the other is that embedded in what I just described is the ability to re-platform. So if you're running on-premise VMware and you want your backup or DR copy to be in Hyper-V, Zerto can re-platform on the wire and take something that's running in VMware and turn it into a virtual machine in Hyper-V. Similarly, if you're running on-prem VMware or Hyper-V and you want to send it up to Azure or AWS, there's a re-platforming there. So it can actually be spun up natively in those environments. And then between the two clouds, we do re-platforming, right? And back down from the clouds to our on-premise solutions. You can take an AWS environment and you can send it back down to have a DR copy locally on Hyper-V. So my point is that there is a broad array existing today in the Zerto landscape of many-to-many replication options and transformation options. So if someone is running in a particular environment today and they want to simply move to another one, Zerto is a great solution for that. Obviously, all of this was built in the context of being a world-class DR solution, but it just so happens that a lot of the things that you need to be a world-class DR solution also make it a world-class replication and transformation solution. So why would you use Zerto for VM migration? Well, it's basically everything I just said. Because you have an RPO, effectively if you're doing it for transformation or migration, of 0, because you can quiesce the primary site for about 10 seconds, get the secondary site up into a consistent state and bring it up, you have guaranteed no data loss. Also, because the ability to cut over to the secondary site can be as seamless as just literally flipping a switch through the orchestration that Zerto provides, you have minimal downtime. Most of the solutions out there for migrations do require actually like taking things down, making changes, and spinning things up. Here it's just using Zerto's GUI to flip a switch and spin up in the other site. Everything about DR, the most important thing you do when you're running a DR solution is test. Everybody tests and tests and tests. Well, you also want to test before you cut over during a migration. So all of those same testing solutions that we built in the DR context make it a great solution for VM migration. And I've already described the multi-cloud capabilities that we bring to this today, to the extent that where we are today. And then we also have the ability, should you choose to do so, you don't have to buy Zerto as DR. We have licenses for DR. We also can sell licenses for migration only. And that's something that I think is going to be potentially increasingly important as people re-examine their hypervisor decisions and strategies. Important to note, you've probably been inundated already with GreenLake, GreenLake, GreenLake. Zerto is on GreenLake. The tile is called HPE GreenLake for disaster recovery. It sits right alongside PCBE, if you're running that, GreenLake for block storage, GreenLake for file, OpsRamp, anything you might be running on GreenLake, Zerto's right there with it. And it actually brings a couple of key features that don't that can't be facilitated using traditional Zerto. The most notable one is multi-site management. So if you're a company that has VMware farms in 4 different places and you want to manage DR potentially between them or what have you, this cloud-based solution allows you to peer into each of those independently, as opposed to having to go on-prem, look at the console, and play with it there. So this is actually a big enhancement. It's not just a nice to have. And one of the things that we put into market last week, this product's about a half step behind the evolution of Zerto. I just described Microsoft Azure. That's been available in the core Zerto product. Now it's also available in GLDR. So that full matrix of many-to-many that I described earlier is now also available on GreenLake. A couple of examples. So these are DR test examples, but they give you a sense of how well this might work if you're using it for migration. United Airlines, significant number of VMs. Their tests average an 8-second RPO. So I'm not going to go through each one of these, but what that means is if you're using it for migration, you have to wait about 8 seconds to get the secondary site up to speed, and then you can cut over. An 8-second hiccup that you can plan for. I won't go through all the rest of them, but you see 7,000 in 7 seconds, 2,600 6 seconds, et cetera. This is a product that has been around for nearly 15 years, and it really does best in market stuff as testified by some of these statistics. The big announcement I have today, probably not unexpected given the rest of what's going on at the show, announcing Zerto for KVM. So we're hearing from a lot of folks that they are looking at Linux and the KVM extensions to Linux as a potential landing spot for their virtualized environments. Now, most of the people we talk to are not making any radical changes. This is going to be an evolution. But the point is that Zerto is committed. We're already committed to a pretty good grouping of the offerings that are out there for folks who want to have multi-cloud, multi-site. We're expanding that. Following our customers, in late 2024, we'll be launching the Zerto for KVM. That will be then added to that grouping of many-to-many that I described earlier, and increasing the flexibility of what Zerto can provide for you, both in a DR and a migration management side of things. OK, that's the end of this. I'll be around after if anybody wants to chat. I like your hat. Went to both shows last weekend. Cyber. We're obviously talking a lot about AI at this show, and AI is definitely the hottest thing that's happening in our industry today, right? But let's not forget about cyber. If you look at the Gartner polls, surveys that they've put into market over the last, this is actually from earlier 2024, so it's not ancient stuff. CEO views, their top one by far was improved security and privacy, and even CIOs, who are obviously, cloud platforms, business intelligence, data analysis, AI, those are all important. But the number one thing is cyber and information security. So this is clearly the time for cyber hasn't passed. There's a new kid on the block called AI, and maybe the cutest girl at the dance, but this is still very, very important stuff, right? Now, the results of people who prepare for this are quite mixed, right? So I don't know how many of you follow American football, but there's a saying that says if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have a quarterback. Similarly, 64% of the organizations we polled have disparate, diverse disaster recovery plans. If you have an organization with more than one disaster recovery plan, you don't have a disaster recovery plan. There's no way that's actually going to work and line up at the end of the day. And 65% of those that we polled took 1 month or longer to recover from a ransomware attack. Then we went one step further and asked people who had actually paid the ransom, why did you pay it? And the top 2 reasons are both related to the fact that the solutions that they had used to prepare for these events were based on backup software. And so they either said it entails too much data loss. My last copy's from last night. I can't lose that much data. I'm just going to pay. Or the second one was it was going to take too long for me to get back into a usable state. So those 2 things are both related to both related to backup software. Backup software has been with us forever, will be with us forever. It's hugely valuable. But I think I've already described Zerto in a way that will make you realize how much better this solution could be if you have an instance and you just need to fail over to something that's a few seconds ago, right? And that's what I'm going to get into next. So the industry is starting to standardize on cyber vaults. The term is being broadly used and used in different ways. It's confusing even what are we talking about when we talk about cyber vaults. There are cloud vaults out there, right? These are typically vendor managed. They're essentially based on someone's archive in the cloud and the ability to potentially recover from that archive, right? Very simple to set up, inexpensive. At recovery time, rarely works and takes forever, right? Because nothing about an archive is set up as a cyber vault, right? Plus it's in the cloud, so it's connected to the internet definitionally, which puts it at risk. Then there are on-premises vaults. Again, these are typically, you'll see most of the backup vendors talk about their version of a cyber vault. It suffers from many of the same things I talked about in the last slide. The recovery times and the restore points are usually inadequate, and people wind up paying. And it's also true that people back up onto second-tier secondary storage, typically. And so that's not what you want to be running your primary on at the end of a disaster. So then you bring in what we've got with the Zerto Cyber Resilience Vault. We announced this in November at Discover Europe, but we've been continuing to enhance it in some very interesting ways, and I want to describe how this works a little bit. It's all flash production storage, as you'll see in a moment, so any of the copies you have using Zerto are ready to be spun up as a production instance. It uses DR, uses Zerto, so it's got high RPIO, high RTO, and as you'll see in a moment, the vault copy is completely air-gapped. It's basically a clean room. Nothing gets into it that we don't allow into it. It's completely cut off from the internet. I'll explain that in a second. So here are the sort of, not just cyber vault, but general Zerto principles, right? The first is replicate and detect. So we want to be looking on the wire to try to find any signs of a cyber threat, but we also want to make sure that we're replicating as quickly as possible to know that we've got copies on the other side. And I'll explain how our software enables some of that. Then isolate and lock. Be able to completely shut down an immutable, isolated, air-gapped tertiary copy, as you'll see in a second, and then test and recover. So I've got some slides that go into some detail here, but I think it's important that I talk through them so that people understand exactly how Zerto stands above the crowd when it comes to these cyber vault solutions. So this is your typical production environment. Everything that's on there, except the red stuff, is just there. Right? You've got your vCenter, you've got virtual machines, you've got data stores. It's running on some sort of storage somewhere in a data center, right? What we do at Zerto is we deploy two different virtual machines. The Zerto virtual machine, which is effectively the brains of the solution, and the way that humans talk to it through a UX, and then the virtual replication appliance. That has to be deployed on the primary site. Then you set up a landing zone. And none of this is Cyber Vault specific yet, I should point out. But you set up a landing zone, and that's where you replicate to, right? And you'll see over there, we also have a vCenter, we have HPE hardware, we have a ZVM, and we have the receiving virtual replication appliance. And every I/O that gets committed over here on the left gets sent across the wire, committed through the VRA to replica data stores, which are those dotted line data store images below. And then there's something very important that we do. We also journal every one of those I/O entries. So you effectively have a laundry list of every single point in time of the secondary site committed in a journal. That enables you to roll up or roll back to any time you want to recover to. We also have, when the information is getting sent, it's obviously all encrypted over the wire. And we also have a clever adaptation of Shannon's entropy that looks for encryption detections in transit to be able to say, we think there might be something happening right around now. They can then send a signal to Zerto in the landing zone, and Zerto will put a checkpoint in that journal I just referenced, so we know around here we think something might have started. So when you go to try to recover, this is where you want to start looking, right? So everything I just described, that is Zerto as it stands if you just buy Zerto. If you buy the Cyber Vault solution, now you have a tertiary air-gapped solution. Okay? And this is basically HPE ProLiant, Aruba networking, and Alletra MP just air-gapped and connected together, networked together, right? What's on that? We basically open up a port, and by default it's every 4 hours, but it doesn't have to be, and take a consistent state from the landing zone, direct copy it to that Alletra MP, and then we take a immutable snapshot at that point. So what you wind up having over here is within the Alletra storage, you have a series of 4-hour immutable snapshots that you can go back to if all hell breaks loose, which is what I'm going to describe in the next slide. And I talked about that. I talked about the immutable snapshots, resilience automation server, and that's what we call the Cyber Resilience Vault. So if you are a non-Zerto customer today and you just have a production environment, you want the vault, you get everything that you see here on the right-hand side. Now, what happens in the event of a disaster? How does Zerto help you recover? Well, say you have a cyber attack on your primary site. Your first line of defense is the landing zone, right? So you just go in and you look through the Zerto console. You select the apps. You select the virtual machines that you want to recover. This is standard Zerto stuff, been around since 2011. You can find from within there a clean checkpoint from the journal, non-disruptively test and validate that clean restore point, and then recover all the workloads within minutes. That's how Zerto works. It's an immediate failover type scenario when you are lucky enough to have an uninfected secondary site, or at least a point in the journal on the secondary site that is uninfected. But what happens if your second site gets infected? Right? What do you do then? Well, it's a little trickier, but it's a little trickier for a good reason, because we want this copy on the far right to be completely air-gapped. So what you have to do here is you literally mount that storage, and you find the immutable snapshot you want to recover to. You power on the vCenter, the ESXi, all the Zerto VMs, which, by the way, are in Alletra in their current state because they got copied over too from the secondary site. Right? So everything that's in that particular snapshot is everything you need in exactly the same point in time. You bring up all those things, and then you recover from Zerto using the journal to whatever restore point you want, just like you did in the middle zone there. So it's not as fast. It's a little more onerous, but it's completely secure. So the sort of base idea here is it's fast, it's secure, it's air-gapped, it's isolated. It's a full stack solution with 3 different copies. And like I said, security over convenience. The idea here is if you find a cyber vault solution that is connected to the internet, it inherently is not protected. So what we've done here is create a solution that doesn't even allow you to connect to the internet until you've gone through all of this stuff to get to a clean point, and then if you want, you can plug it in and get back to business. At RSA a few weeks ago, we announced that the Cyber Resilience Vault now runs on Alletra Storage MP. There's a lot of advantages here. I'm going to talk to a little bit conceptually in a slide or two. This is what enables us to do immutability. This is what enables us to take the secondary site and the tertiary site and make sure that they talk to each other flawlessly. They're exactly the same piece of hardware. They don't have to be the same size disk, but they do need to be the same headers. So everything, all the goodness you get from Alletra Storage MP now comes in this environment as well. Quick case study, and this is not made up, and I hear this all the time, right? So the before state of this leading financial services firm in the UK, they were using legacy backup to protect from cyber vaults. Every time they ran their tests, they would lose between 12 and 24 hours of data based on how their backups ran. The recovery time took them weeks, and they were not in compliance with any of the local or, frankly, internal sort of regulations or compliance that they had set for themselves. After using Cyber Vault, it's 1,100 VM environments, and not small. Their data loss, as I've described, would be very minimal. Their recovery time is in hours, and now they have met their compliance requirements and exceeded them. So this is sort of how we're approaching this cyber threat world with our Zerto Cyber Vault. So where do we go from here? First one I want to point out is that we are nearing the 3-year anniversary of the acquisition of Zerto into HPE. And as you've seen, we've started to take advantage of that. We're starting to use Alletra MP in some of our solutions. That blending together, the incorporation of Zerto goodness into the rest of the HPE portfolio, you should be looking for more examples of that going forward, but not at the expense of one of our core value propositions, which is that we are hardware and software agnostic at the end of the day. You can deploy Zerto against any hardware platform you choose to use. I already described in the first half of the deck the vendor and platform lock-in problem, right? With Zerto, you can have a many-to-many solution that allows you to move seamlessly from one hypervisor solution, whether it's in the cloud or on-prem, to another. Simplify management. This gets back to our inclusion in HPE GreenLake, so you can manage multi-zoned environments from one place. And we're going to continue to work on enhancing our cyber resilience capabilities. What we have today is best in market, but there's a lot more that we can and will be doing both on our own and through targeted partnerships that we are going to start to unveil.